Watch before deleted. She opened my door boldly, dropped her robe, and climbed onto my bed. He had been living in that small apartment for about 3 months now. The divorce papers were finally signed, and he was trying to build a new life from scratch. Every evening followed the same pattern. Come home from work, heat up some dinner, and spend a few hours on the laptop catching up on projects. The silence didn't bother him anymore. Actually, it felt peaceful after all the arguments and tension from before. That Tuesday evening started like any other. He was sitting at his desk, working on a presentation that was due the next morning. The clock showed 9:30. His coffee had gone cold, but he kept sipping it anyway. That's when he heard the knock. 3 quick taps on the door. Press. He wasn't expecting anyone. His friends knew he liked his face these days, and deliveries usually came earlier in the day. Preparation. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was the woman from downstairs. He had seen her a few times in the elevator and once at the mailboxes. They had exchanged polite hellos, maybe commented on the weather once or twice. That was the extent of their relationship. Neighbors in a big building, nothing more. He opened the door slowly. She was standing there in a long coat, and her eyes looked worried. Her hair was a bit messy, and she seemed out of breath, like she had been running or climbing the stairs too quickly. Before he could ask what was wrong, she started explaining. Her apartment had flooded. Water was everywhere. She had tried calling the building manager, but nobody was picking up. The emergency maintenance line just kept ringing. She didn't know what to do. He felt a bit confused. Why come to him? They barely knew each other, but at the same time, he could see she was genuinely upset. Her hands were shaking slightly as she spoke. He thought about his options for a moment. Turn her away and seem heartless, or let her in and deal with whatever this situation was. He stepped aside and told her she could wait inside while they figured things out. But she walked in quickly, almost rushing past him. He closed the door and offered her a seat on the couch. Would she like some tea or water? She nodded and said tea would be nice. Went to the kitchen, filled the kettle and put it on the stove. While waiting for the water to boil, he grabbed his phone and tried calling the building manager himself. Breath. Just like she said, no answer. He sent a text message instead explaining the situation. When he came back to the living room with 2 cups of tea, she was standing by the window, looking out at the street below. She thanked him for the tea and sat down. They talked for a few minutes about the building's poor maintenance, how things always seemed to break at the worst times. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her cup, not really making eye contact. Breast. He assumed she was just stressed about the water damage in her place. Then, something strange happened. She suddenly stood up, and her whole mood changed. The nervousness vanished. She looked directly at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Without saying a word, she unbuttoned her coat and let it fall to the floor. Underneath, she was fully dressed in regular clothes, jeans and a sweater, but the gesture felt so dramatic and purposeful. He didn't know what to say or do. His mind went blank for a second. Was this really happening? Breath. He started to stammer something, maybe to ask what she was doing, but she was already walking toward his bedroom. His small apartment had an open layout, so the bedroom was just a few steps away. She walked straight to his bed and sat down on the edge of it. He stood frozen in the living room, holding his cup of tea like it was the only normal thing left in this bizarre situation. She looked at him and said something he didn't expect at all. Her voice was calm now, completely different from the panicked tone at the door. She said she needed to tell him something important. something she couldn't say anywhere else, or to anyone else. His heart was racing. 1,000 thoughts ran through his mind. Was this some kind of setup? Was someone going to burst through the door with cameras? Breaking. He wanted to ask her to leave, but something in her expression stopped him. Behind all the boldness, there was genuine fear in her eyes. She started talking, and what came out was not what he expected. Breaths. There was no flood in her apartment. That was a lie. Breath. She had made it up because she needed an excuse to get off the street and into someone's apartment fast. She had seen someone desperate. Someone dangerous. Someone who had been following her for weeks. His confusion turned into concern. He sat down on the chair near his desk, keeping distance but listening carefully. She explained that she had an ex who wouldn't leave her alone. The relationship had ended badly months ago, but he kept showing up at her work, outside her apartment, following her to the grocery store. She had tried talking to him, blocking his number. Everything. Nothing worked. Tonight, she had seen him in the lobby of their building. She panicked and ran up the stairs. Instead of taking the elevator, she didn't want to go to her own apartment because he knew exactly where she lived. He had knocked on his door because his was the first one she reached, and she remembered his face from their brief encounters. He had always seemed kind, safe. The dramatic entrance, dropping her coat, walking to his bedroom. All of it was a test. She needed to know how he would react. Would he try something? Would he get aggressive? Would he show any signs of being dangerous himself? She had learned the hard way that you can't always trust people, even neighbors who seem normal. By being bold and vulnerable, she could see someone's true character quickly. He sat there processing everything she had just said. The situation had gone from strange to serious in a matter of minutes. This wasn't just some weird encounter anymore. This was someone genuinely afraid and asking for help in the only way she knew how. He looked at her sitting on his bed, and for the first time that evening, he really saw her. Not just a neighbor or a stranger with a strange story, but a real person dealing with something terrifying. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and despite her bold entrance, she now seemed small and scared. He realized she had taken a huge risk coming to his apartment. She didn't really know him. He could have been anyone. He set his tea down and asked her the obvious question. But had she called the police? She nodded slowly and explained that she had filed 2 reports already. Both times, they had told her there wasn't much they could do unless he actually threatened her directly or tried to hurt her. Following someone around wasn't enough, apparently. Breaths. They suggested she get a restraining order, but that required going to court, filling out paperwork, and waiting. Meanwhile, she still had to live her life, go to work, come home. And he was always somewhere nearby, watching. He felt a wave of frustration hearing this. How could the system be so useless? But he also understood that police couldn't arrest someone just for being in the same places. Still, it didn't seem right that she had to live in fear, while everyone told her to wait and follow procedures. He asked her what she wanted to do right now. Did she feel safe going back to her apartment tonight? She shook her head. She had seen him in the lobby less than 30 minutes ago. He probably knew by now that she had gone upstairs, but didn't enter her apartment. If she went down there now, he might be waiting. Or worse, he might follow her inside. Her voice cracked a little when she said this. She was trying to stay strong, but the fear was obvious. He made a decision right then. He told her she could stay for the night. She could sleep on the couch, and he would make sure his door was locked and secure. In the morning, they would figure out the next steps together. Maybe call the police again with fresh information. Maybe help her file that restraining order. Breath. She looked at him with such relief and gratitude that he felt embarrassed. He wasn't doing anything special, just basic human decency. Breath. She thanked him multiple times, apologizing for the dramatic entrance and for lying about the flood. She explained that she had practiced what she would say if someone opened their door, but when the moment came, the flood story was all she could think of. It sounded more believable than saying someone was chasing her. He told her he understood. Though honestly, he was still processing everything. He grabbed some blankets and a pillow from his closet and set up the couch for her. She asked if she could use his bathroom to wash her face and calm down a bit. "Of course," he said. While she was in there, he checked all his door locks twice and made sure the windows were secure. His apartment was on the 5th floor, so nobody was climbing in, but it made him feel better to check. When she came out, she looked a bit more composed. They sat in the living room and talked more about her situation. She told him about how the relationship had started normal enough. He seemed nice at first, charming even. But slowly, things changed. He became possessive, jealous, controlling. When she tried to end things, he refused to accept it. He would show up at her door crying, begging for another chance. Then he would get angry and yell. The cycle repeated until she finally got brave enough to cut all contact. That's when the following started. He would park outside her work. She would see him at the coffee shop she visited every morning. Once, she found him sitting on the stairs near her apartment at 2 a.m. When she confronted him, he acted innocent, saying he just happened to be in the neighborhood. But it was too many coincidences. She knew he was tracking her somehow, maybe through social media or mutual friends. But hearing all this made him angry on her behalf. Nobody should have to live like this. He asked if she had family or friends she could stay with for a while. She sighed and explained that she had moved to this city for work about a year ago. Her family was in another state, and she didn't want to worry them or admit that her life had become such a mess. Her friends here were mostly work colleagues, and she didn't feel comfortable burdening them with something this serious. He understood that feeling. After his divorce, he had isolated himself too. Pride and shame made it hard to reach out, even when you needed help. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. Then she asked him about himself. Why was he living alone? Did he have family nearby? He gave her the short version. Recently divorced, trying to start over, keeping to himself mostly. Work kept him busy enough that he didn't have to think too much about the loneliness. She nodded like she understood completely. Sometimes starting over means cutting yourself off from everything familiar, even if it makes life harder in different ways. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. They talked about the building, the neighbors, funny things they had noticed. Breaths. She mentioned the old man on the 3rd floor who always wore a suit, even to check his mail. He talked about the couple next door who argued in a language he couldn't identify but was pretty sure they were actually just passionately discussing cooking based on the amazing smells that came from their apartment. It was strange how quickly the mood changed. An hour ago, she had burst into his life with a dramatic entrance and a scary story. Now they were sitting like old friends, sharing observations and laughing quietly. Maybe it was the relief of having someone to talk to, or maybe it was just easier to focus on normal things when everything else felt overwhelming. Around midnight, they both started yawning. He showed her where everything was, the bathroom, the kitchen if she got hungry, and reminded her that his bedroom door would be open if she needed anything. She thanked him again, and he could see she meant it deeply. He went to his room, leaving the door slightly open so he could hear if anything happened. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Breath. His mind kept replaying the evening's events. Tomorrow, he would help her figure out real solutions. Tonight, at least she was safe. Morning came faster than he expected. He must have fallen asleep eventually because the sound of his alarm startled him awake. 6:30 in the morning. He had that presentation to give at work, the one he had been preparing last night before everything happened. For a moment he forgot about his unexpected guest, but then he heard movement in the living room. He got up and walked out to find her already awake, sitting on the couch with the blankets folded neatly beside her. She looked tired, but calmer than last night. She apologized for intruding on his morning and said she would leave soon so he could get ready for work. He told her not to worry about it and offered to make breakfast. Dad. She seemed hesitant, but agreed. They sat in his small kitchen area eating toast and drinking coffee. The morning light made everything feel less dramatic than it had the night before. He asked her what her plan was for the day. She said she would go to the courthouse and start the process for a restraining order. She had looked it up online during the night when she couldn't sleep. The forms seemed complicated, but she would figure it out. He suggested they go together after his work. He could help her with the paperwork and make sure everything was filed correctly. She looked surprised by the offer. Why would he do that? They barely knew each other. He shrugged and said that sometimes people just need someone in their corner. Besides, he knew a little bit about legal paperwork from his divorce. Not the same thing, but similar enough to be useful. She accepted his help with visible relief. They exchanged phone numbers so they could coordinate later. Before she left, she checked through his peephole carefully, scanning the hallway. When she was satisfied nobody was out there, she thanked him one more time and quickly walked to the stairs. She avoided the elevator, he noticed. Too easy to get trapped in there if someone was waiting. His day at work felt surreal. He gave his presentation on autopilot, his mind only half focused on the slides and data. His colleague said it went well, but he could barely remember what he had said. During lunch, he checked his phone multiple times, half expecting a message from her saying something had gone wrong. Nothing came through. He hoped. That was a good sign. After work, they met outside the courthouse. She had printed out all the necessary forms and brought documentation of the police reports she had filed. They spent 2 hours going through everything, filling in details, making copies. The clerk explained that once filed, a judge would review it and decide whether to issue a temporary order. If approved, there would be a hearing where both parties could present their cases. Walking out of the courthouse, she seemed lighter somehow. Like having the paperwork filed made the problem more official and therefore more solvable. He offered to drive her home, but she wanted to walk. The weather was nice, and she said moving helped her think. He understood that. They walked together toward their building, talking about random things, avoiding the heavy topic they had just spent hours on. When they got close to their building, she suddenly stopped, her whole body tensed up. He followed her gaze and saw a car parked across the street. A man was sitting inside, looking directly at their building. She grabbed his arm and pulled him back around the corner. That was him, she whispered. Her ex. Bose, just sitting there, waiting. His heart started pounding. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was real and happening right now. He asked her what she wanted to do. They could call the police, but she reminded him that he wasn't technically doing anything illegal. Sitting in a parked car on a public street wasn't a crime. They could walk into the building and hope he didn't follow, but that meant leading him to know for sure which building she lived in, if he didn't already know. They stood there for a few minutes, hidden around the corner, trying to decide. She was shaking again, just like last night. He felt a protective anger rising in him. This guy was terrorizing her, and there was nothing anyone seemed able to do about it. Desperate, the legal system moved too slowly. The police couldn't act without evidence of a direct threat. Meanwhile, she was trapped, unable to even go home safely. He made a decision. He told her to wait there and stay out of sight. He would walk to the building alone and see what happened. Or if the guy followed him or approached him, at least they would know his intentions. She protested, saying it was too dangerous, but he was already walking before she could stop him. He crossed the street and walked straight toward the building entrance, forcing himself not to look at the parked car. His hands were sweating. What was he doing? This was stupid and reckless, but he kept walking. He reached the building door and stopped, pretending to search for his keys in his pocket. That's when he heard the car door open. Footsteps approached from behind. He turned around slowly. The man was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s, wearing jeans and a jacket. He didn't look particularly threatening at first glance, just an ordinary guy, but there was something intense in his eyes, something desperate. The man asked if he knew her. Breath. Used her actual name. He said he had seen them together, walking from downtown. He just wanted to talk to her, to explain some things. He wasn't a bad guy. There had been misunderstandings. If he could just see her for 5 minutes, everything would be fine. He listened to this speech and felt disgusted. This was manipulation, plain and simple. The guy was trying to seem reasonable, harmless, just a confused ex-boyfriend wanting closure. But he remembered everything she had told him last night. This wasn't about closure. This was about control. He told the man clearly that he didn't know who he was talking about. The man's expression changed. The reasonable mask slipped for just a second, and underneath was anger. He stepped closer, invading personal space. He said he knew they had been together. He had seen them. What were they doing downtown? Where was she now? He held his ground and repeated that he didn't know what the man was talking about. He was just trying to get into his building and go home. The man stared at him for a long moment, then suddenly smiled. It was a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Fine," he said. "Have a nice evening." Then he turned and walked back to his car. He waited until the man got in and started the engine. The car pulled away slowly, passing by once more before disappearing around the corner. Only then did he allow himself to breathe properly. His hands were shaking now. He walked back to where she was hiding and told her what happened. Oration. She looked terrified. Now he had seen her ex. Now he was involved.
She kept apologizing, saying she never should have dragged him into this mess.
But he told her to stop. He had made his own choice to help. Oration. Besides, they now had something useful. A direct confrontation. Evidence that this guy was actively looking for her and willing to approach strangers about it. That would help with the restraining order. They decided she shouldn't go home tonight either. It wasn't safe. The ex clearly knew the building and was watching it. He offered his couch again, and this time she accepted without hesitation. They ordered food delivery and spent the evening going over everything that had happened, writing down details while they were fresh, times, exact words, descriptions. Building a case, the next few days fell into a strange routine. She stayed on his couch every night. During the day, she went to work and tried to maintain some normalcy. He went to his job and checked in with her throughout the day through text messages. They were two strangers thrown together by circumstances, becoming something like friends out of necessity. The temporary restraining order came through on the third day. The judge had approved it based on the documentation and the incident outside their building. Now her ex legally had to stay at least 500 feet away from her. Violating it would mean arrest. She felt safer knowing this, but also realistic. A piece of paper didn't create a force field. Determined people found ways around legal orders all the time. They didn't see her ex for almost a week. Maybe the restraining order had worked. Maybe he had finally given up and moved on. She started to relax slightly, began talking about going back to her own apartment. He encouraged this while also feeling strangely reluctant. Having someone else in his face had been weird at first, but now the apartment felt less empty. He had someone to talk to in the evenings, someone to share meals with. The loneliness he had gotten used to was gone. On the 8th night, everything changed. They were watching a movie after dinner when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. A voice he recognized immediately. Her ex on the other end. How did he get this number? The voice was calm. Too calm. He said he knew she was there. He just wanted to talk. Could he come up for a minute? He felt ice in his stomach. This man had somehow figured out where she was staying and had gotten his phone number. That took effort and dedication. This wasn't someone who was giving up. He told the men no, hung up, and immediately called the police. They had violated the restraining order by making contact. That was grounds for arrest. While they waited for the police, he checked all the locks again. She sat on the couch, looking pale and scared. Safety. The safety they had been building for the past week had just shattered. The police arrived 20 minutes later and took their statement. They said they would patrol the area and look for the ex's car. If they found him nearby, they would arrest him. But there were no guarantees. After the police left, neither of them could sleep. They sat up talking about what to do next. She couldn't keep hiding in his apartment forever. She needed a real solution. He suggested she might need to move, leave the city entirely, start completely fresh somewhere her ex couldn't find her. She had thought about this but wasn't sure she could just abandon her job, her life here, everything she had built. Around 2 a.m, they heard noises in the hallway. Desk. Footsteps. Then someone trying door handles. His door handle rattled. They both froze. He grabbed his phone, ready to call the police again. Operation. The rattling stopped. They heard footsteps moving away, trying other doors down the hall. Then silence. He looked through the peephole but couldn't see anyone. They waited, barely breathing, for what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. Then his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know you're helping her stop." That was all it said. He showed her the message. Her face went white. This had escalated way beyond what either of them had expected. This wasn't just about her anymore. Rask. Now he was a target too, just for being kind to a neighbor in trouble. She kept saying she was sorry, that she would leave right away, that she never meant for him to get hurt. But he was angry now. Not at her, but at the situation. At a system that couldn't protect people until after something terrible happened. At a man who thought stalking and threatening people was acceptable behavior. He told her she wasn't going anywhere. They would figure this out together. Ra. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and hugged him. It was the first real physical contact they had had, and it felt natural, like they had known each other much longer than just a week. The next morning, exhausted and stressed, they made plans. Real plans this time. She would talk to her boss about working remotely for a while. She would stay with her family in another state until things calmed down. He would help her pack and make sure she got to the airport safely. It wasn't fair that she had to run, but sometimes survival meant making unfair choices. 3 days later, he drove her to the airport. They had packed her most important belongings in 2 suitcases. The rest would stay in her apartment under lock and key. She had given notice to her landlord that she might not renew her lease. Everything she had built in this city was being put on pause because one person refused to respect boundaries. At the airport, they stood awkwardly for a moment. He had thought a lot about what to say, but couldn't find the right words. She hugged him again and thanked him for everything. For opening his door that first night, for not judging her or turning her away, for helping her when he had no obligation to, for being a good person when she needed one most. He told her to stay safe and to let him know when she landed. She promised she would. Then she walked through security, and he watched until she disappeared from view. Driving home, his apartment felt incredibly empty. The couch looked bare without her blankets and pillow. The kitchen felt too quiet without 2 people moving around in it. But something else happened that he didn't expect. 2 days after she left, he was walking to his car after work when someone grabbed him from behind. He was slammed against a wall, and when he looked up, it was her ex. The man's face was twisted with rage. Where was she? What had he done with her? He tried to push back, but the man was stronger.
I struggled in the parking lot, attracting attention from people nearby. Someone yelled that they were calling the police.
The ex landed several punches before running away. He slumped against the wall, his nose bleeding, his ribs aching. Security from his office building came running out. He spent the next 3 hours at the hospital getting checked out and at the police station filing yet another report. The assault, combined with a restraining order violation, meant there was now a warrant out for the ex's arrest. But that didn't help him right now, sitting with a broken nose and bruised ribs. The hospital discharged him that evening with painkillers and instructions to rest. His face looked terrible, bruised and swollen. Breathing hurt because of his ribs. He called her from the hospital to let her know what happened. She was horrified and blamed herself completely. He told her to stop. This wasn't her fault. This was the fault of one person who couldn't accept no for an answer. Over the next few weeks, he healed physically, but something had changed in him. He had lived a quiet, isolated life after his divorce, not wanting drama or complications. Then she had knocked on his door, and everything had changed. He had been pulled into something difficult and even dangerous. But he didn't regret it. He had done the right thing, even if it cost him. The police caught her ex 2 weeks after the assault. He had violated the restraining order multiple times and assaulted someone, so the charges were serious. He would likely face jail time. She called him when she heard the news, crying with relief. Finally, she could breathe. Finally, she was safe. They stayed in touch after that. Phone calls every few days, text messages about random things, breaths. She stayed with her family for 3 months before feeling safe enough to return to the city. By that time, her ex was in jail awaiting trial, and she had found a new apartment in a different neighborhood. A fresh start. When she came back, they met for coffee. It was strange seeing each other in a normal setting after everything they had been through. They talked about regular things, work, hobbies, the weather. But there was an understanding between them that didn't need words. They had been through something intense together, and it had created a bond. While she told him she had been going to therapy to deal with everything that had happened, press people again, to not see threats everywhere, to rebuild her sense of safety. It was hard work, but she was making progress. He mentioned he had started therapy too, dealing with his divorce and the isolation he had wrapped himself in. Sometimes you need someone to help you see the patterns you're stuck in. Months passed. They became actual friends, not just people thrown together by crisis. They would meet for dinner sometimes or watch movies at her new apartment. No drama, no danger, just two people who had helped each other through dark times and decided they liked each other as humans. One evening, almost a year after that first knock on his door, they were sitting on her couch after dinner. She brought up that night how she had tested him by being bold and vulnerable. She apologized again for the dramatic entrance. He laughed and said it had definitely been memorable. Breath. Then he thanked her. She looked confused. Thank her for what?
He explained that before she knocked on his door, he had been sleepwalking through life.
Going through the motions, keeping everyone at a distance, afraid of getting hurt again. Her crisis had forced him out of that bubble. It had reminded him that connection with other people, even difficult and complicated connection, was better than safe isolation. She had needed help that night, but in helping her, he had helped himself too. She smiled and said she had been thinking the same thing. The experience, as terrible as it was, had taught her that there were still good people in the world, but people who would help a stranger just because it was the right thing to do. That knowledge had helped her heal more than anything else. They sat in comfortable silence after that. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones where you finally say the things you've been thinking for months. Life had thrown them together in the strangest way possible. Breaths, a knock on the door, a dramatic entrance, a test to see if kindness still existed. And somehow, through all the fear and danger and uncertainty, both of them had found exactly what they needed. He never forgot that first night. The confusion and shock of watching her drop her coat and walk to his bed. At the time, it had seemed crazy and frightening. Now he understood it perfectly. When you've been hurt enough times, when you've learned that people can't always be trusted, sometimes you need to test them in extreme ways. You need to make yourself completely vulnerable and see how they react. It's not about being dramatic. It's about survival. Her ex eventually went to trial and was sentenced to 2 years in prison with a longer restraining order after release. With him. She attended the trial with him beside her for support. When the sentence was announced, she didn't cheer or celebrate. She just felt tired and ready to move forward with her life. Time continued to pass. They both dated other people, had their own separate lives and experiences, but they always stayed in touch, always checked in on each other. The bond formed in crisis didn't fade with time. If anything, it deepened into something rare and valuable. Years later, when people asked him about the craziest thing that ever happened to him, he would tell a simplified version of this story. A neighbor in trouble, an unexpected friendship, learning that helping others helps yourself. He would leave out the dramatic details, the fear, the violence. Those parts were private, shared only between people who lived through them. But sometimes, when he was alone and thinking about the path his life had taken, he would remember that knock on his door. 3 quick taps that changed everything. He had opened that door not knowing what would happen next, and that simple act of opening had led to healing, growth, and connection he never expected. Life works that way sometimes, Britt. The most important moments come disguised as interruptions, as problems, as other people's crises. And if you're brave enough to open the door and face them, you might find exactly what you didn't know you needed.